Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for tuning in. John Kelly, profiler here, and welcome. Today, we're dealing with a very, very sad show. I mean, they're all pretty sad shows here. Who killed Noah Presgrove? Yeah, who killed Noah Presgrove? Please hang in there with us, and you might have some ideas, especially those of you that live out that way where he was found dead. We're going to be trying to go over this and hit on some different points of interest, points we feel you might be interested in as well. And we're always open to your feedback. Please like and subscribe. Please comment. We love your comments. And see if you can help us solve this mystery. Who killed Noah Presgrove, 19 years old? I mean, it's a shame. At this point in time, our deepest condolences from all of us go out to his family and friends. We're very sorry for Noah's death. 19 years old. Pretty sad, pretty rough for his family and friends for sure. And hopefully we can shed some light on this. Today, I'm really honored to have Pam Bogart on the show. And Pam has many years of experience working as, I'll say, a crisis manager and investigator. I mean, yeah, you did have to investigate some of that stuff in crisis as well. And being in the court system and working with the courts for, maybe 30 years or 25 years, Pam has put a lot of time in. She's a real professional, and that's why she's on the show. Also, we have Dustin Ranck. Dustin is, a fantastic private investigator. He really understands the culture out there in Oklahoma. And he really knows a lot about that particular area and where Noah Presgrove was found. So I'm gonna start by asking Dustin if he can paint a picture of 81 and where Noah was found, and let's see, where we can go with this and how we can kind of deep dive and backtrack through this and see if we can come up with anything that makes sense or at least get started in a direction that makes sense. Okay, so Dustin, if you'd be kind enough to start us off.
Yeah. Hey, John. Hey, Pam. Yeah, Highway 81 it kind of runs through a good chunk of Oklahoma, north to south there. So, where Noah was found outside that little town of Terrell. It's pretty remote. It's not different geography, different climate essentially than what we were just dealing with in Texas County out there in the Panhandle. But it's rural. It's a rural community, Jefferson County, where Terrell is located. Now, no, it wasn't from Terrell. That's just where apparently that party was from that he was at. But, those little communities there, there's not necessarily a lot going on down there. There's, a lot of farming community, a lot of mechanics. There's a lot of stuff that happens down there work-wise, but, it's not like a robust economy. I mean, like a lot of parts of Oklahoma, other than the population centers, like it can be tricky to get by, especially as we talked after COVID, with everybody's feeling the effects of economically with the higher prices and everything else. And it's not, one of the tricky parts when you live in a rural community is you don't necessarily, when you have that type of massive inflation, you don't necessarily have the lateral or vertical or backward movement to switch it up to make a new game plan. So that's something that affects people everywhere for sure, but it really impacts the smaller communities. They just don't have the opportunities that they need always to get ahead of the wave, so to speak. So, but not unlike Texas County. I mean, those rural counties, there's a lot of overlap with people and their activities. A lot of it revolves around sports. You might have a school in one county. Of course, they're playing schools in another county. Those parents are going to know each other a lot of the time. A lot of church going on, church activities. There's all kinds of stuff socially, like in their social construct, that brings people together. Yes, they're geographically sort of isolated, but socially, not always. You know, people do make connections, and they have a lot of good networking that happens in those small places. So when I saw that this case was still ongoing, because I think it's coming up, you know, 8 months or 9 months, it was pretty shocking to me, because there's just, it's not, and as we've talked, you know, it's not big city life down there. You know, things don't happen in as much of a vacuum as they say, you know, like New York City, right? It's just, you can't be as anonymous. So when I see this poor kid and what happened to him, you know, I'm just like, oh my gosh. The first thing that came to mind is like, man, somebody's got to know what's happened to him, because there just isn't a lot of places for people to bury secrets, you know, especially social ones. And with a kid being at a party and coming in contact with all these people, I just thought it was super duper sad. But yeah, it's a rural community, a lot of farming, you know, various and sundry stuff, but it's not, you know, it's not a big place where a lot of economy has taken place.
You know, just something else too, just to put it out there. I think they said there was not a murder investigation in the beginning. Um, you know, but this kid, God bless him, didn't kill himself. And, you know, somebody killed him. Uh, is it because somebody beat him to death, or a few people beat him to death, or a couple of people beat him to death? I don't know. Is it somebody that hit him with a car, killed him with a car? But you know, I have a real problem with that, because if somebody hit him with a car and killed him with a car and didn't report it, I mean, to me, you know, murder is kind of a an interesting term. Okay, and I think there's voluntary and involuntary murder that takes place, and you know, we need to look at it. We need to really, really look at it. And was it intentional? Was it intentional? Was the killing intentional? You know? I mean, what do you have to say, Pam? And not necessarily following what I'm saying or jumping in, but just you know, off the top of your head. I mean, you know, over the years, you've seen you know, a lot of kids that get mixed up in drugs, booze, and everything else, you know. I mean, how's this grab you? What do you want to talk about?
Well, I'm just, you know, in all that I've read about it, which, you know, it recently has been a lot, because initially they weren't giving it any coverage, right? I think that,
There was no coverage, right?
right, exactly. I mean, you think about, this happened all the way back on Labor Day weekend in 2023. You know, why weren't we hearing about it then? You know, but News Nation seemed to be the first people that came out, right? That really
Absolutely.
sort
Kudos
of,
to News Nation.
right. And I think that they interviewed his brother and his sister. They had a panel where they interviewed the sister and one of his friends. Um, to me, I mean, like, you know, you have a combination of alcohol and, like, you know, the party seemed to be going on for days. I mean, I'm not sure how many days, but that's kind of what I read, that it was a couple of days in party, you know. You know, these kids just graduated. Maybe some of them didn't. Maybe some of them were older. Um, I don't know. Once you mix that, and you know, and a lot of what I've read said that, you know, he had an argument with somebody. So did the argument get out of hand? I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, I think I had mentioned this before, that maybe people crashed the party that weren't supposed to be there. And he got, you know, he was a little maybe ornery or something with them. And, you know, if they're not your friends, and, you know, who knows what kind of people could come through, and, you know, so
Absolutely.
yeah, but I mean, I kind of think that it's interesting, because I kind of think that, yeah, something happened. And like you said, he did, you know, he didn't do it to himself. Something happened, and there seems to me that people know things and they're just not coming forward, maybe out of fear, or, you know, maybe out of, maybe whoever did, you know, like participated in this, maybe there's connection somewhere and people are afraid because of that, you know, but.
Well, the point of it is, you know, is it somebody he had an argument with? And possibly they did not do it, but maybe a friend of theirs got wind of him arguing with somebody else.
Right.
You know, I mean, what we have to look at here and what we have to start with, and it's something you brought up, it's important. You know, when you're looking at the autopsy report and you see the physical damage that this young man endured, all right? I mean, it's really, really horrible. We need to take a look at that. And because, you know, it looks like somebody, you know, in one way or another hurt him. And it looks like to me, this was like anger induced. But how we have to approach it, I would like to approach it here, is how he was hurt. If we can figure out how he was hurt, and the audience certainly will be joining us, and they'll want to join us as we get more into this because it is intriguing. The how can lead us to the why. The how can lead us to the why. And we're going to cover that now. And then the why can possibly lead us to the who. Okay? Because I do not believe he did this to himself, as we all can agree on.
Mhm.
Whether it was intentional, non-intentional, what I'm saying there is like a car accident or some kind of accident in some way that messed him up this way, which I cannot even begin to imagine what kind of accident could do that. I mean, I could imagine a car accident, but you know, car accidents, there's usually skids, there's usually parts of the car that's left on the highway. There's usually a bunch of other things. I mean, you know, talk about that, Dustin, because you made a lot of sense earlier on, you know, people that get thrown out of cars. Let's say he was hurt somewhere else, he was killed somewhere else even, and then he was tossed out of the car, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, how that could impact a lot of these injuries as well. And we want to get up that autopsy report. If we could put that up and maybe talk a little bit about, you know, some of the things that happened and, you know, how you know, he endured these physical complications to whatever happened to him, be it a terrible beating, an accident, or what have you. It looks like this poor guy was hit by a building. We got abraded avulsion, laceration of the left top of the head, abrasions of the lateral left eyebrow, corner of the left eye, abrasions of the right back, of the head and over the right ear. I mean, this is unbelievable. Lacerations of, you know, the midline mucosa of the lower lip. Can't even pronounce some of these words. Laceration of the left surface of the tongue, subcutaneous scalp, and subgellical hemorrhage of the potential of the partial occipital, bilateral temporal, and left frontal regions of the head. Left temporal muscle lacerations and hemorrhage. I mean, I'm just going to put this up there and let the audience take a look at this, because this just goes on and on. Bilateral, you know, subarachnoid. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right. Hemorrhage of approximately 20 millimeters. Subdural hemorrhage, approximately 20 millimeters. swelling of the brain with lacerations. I mean, it's like he got hit by a building, not by a car or a club, and we're talking basal skull fracture splitting the middle base of the skull into two, anterior and posterior, and extending the left temporal and sphenoid bones, whatever that means, and around, I'm no doctor here, as Dustin was saying, we're not doctors, and around the occipital bone. Am I saying that right?
Occipital.
Occipital bone. I mean, this guy, it's like he was thrown out of an airplane or something. I mean, it's like unbelievable to me, but I don't believe he was thrown out of an airplane. I don't believe he got hit by a building. And I'm looking at possible getting hit by a car, but we're not seeing any evidence of being hit by a car. And, I'm not going any further with this. I'm going to leave this for the folks to take a look at. I think this is important. Our audience needs to go over this with a fine-tooth comb and maybe have a medical dictionary next to you as you start to go over some of these words and terms. Okay. I'm a meat and potatoes kind of investigator and profiler, and looking at this, I just have to believe that this guy may have been hit by a car, but I have real sincere doubts about that. I'm looking at a beating. I'm looking at a horrible, horrible beatdown and blunt force trauma by a blunt force instrument, being a bat or something of that nature, maybe tire irons, a couple of guys with tire irons or pipes or something. I don't know, pretty unbelievable. So anyway, getting back to this, we're looking at the how did he get so physically beat up, the why was it done, and then getting back to the who. Okay. I mean, this is a very sad situation. One thing I'm looking at that's really grabbing at me, and I know it grabbed at you guys, 0.14 alcohol level, 0.14 blood alcohol level. Okay. So at that point in time, he's not thinking right. He's probably got complete slurred speech. His body is feeling somewhat depressed, physically depressed. You're looking at somebody probably staggering. Coordination out the door. Hardly any coordination whatsoever. And you're looking at somebody that is naked with two different shoes on. And believe me when I tell you, alcohol can set you up for that, especially 0.14 alcohol level when they tested him. Could have been higher before when they tested him, because alcohol does dissipate as well over a period of time. So anybody that's that drunk and is acting, kind of in a real laissez-faire way that, they're just about existing at this point in time. His immune system and central nervous system, have to be pretty depressed, in this state. And alcohol is a very, very strong very strong central nervous system depressant. I mean, everybody knows that. You drink enough and long enough, and you're going to be staggering and slurring your words and not knowing what you're saying, and you're going to be quite the mess. Okay. And we all know people like that. When they drink, they get to a certain point and they start slurring their words. And then, we have to also look at the party, I mean, when he was at the party, there's videos we have of him kind of egging people on to hit him and slap him or whatever. I mean, I'm sure he all fun in his mind in some way, being in the state he was in, because he wasn't turning around striking anybody or beating anybody up. God bless him, big enough guy as he was. He seemed like a jolly, kind of giant kind of guy, But somebody or somebody's, got a hold of this guy. They got a hold of Noah Presgrove, and for whatever reason, and hopefully we will find out the why, because there's a lot of kids involved here, and we know kids talk eventually. So hopefully we're going to find out the why. Last I hear, he's leaving the house, and I can't say this is written in stone, but last I hear, he's angry, at an argument with the girl, so he left the house, but so right away I started to think, well, he had an argument with his girlfriend or whatever. Didn't we hear from the family he didn't have a girlfriend, or isn't that what we heard? That he didn't have a girlfriend? I don't know how true that is or not. But the point I'm trying to make is, seems he walked out the door after that argument, and which would lead me to believe he could be angry and upset and pretty pissed off, and obviously could have run into somebody or some people who were pissed off as well for whatever reason, and really went to town on, because there's no way he could really defend himself in this kind of state. There's no way he could defend himself. He was at their mercy, and I think got beating the cost of his life. So we shall see. More will be revealed, I'm sure. I'm talking a lot. Pam, Dustin, say something. Jump in here. Get carried away on this.
Go
You
ahead,
wanna
Pam.
first, Dustin?
Go ahead, Pam. I'll dive in after you.
Okay, I was just like thinking as you were talking, John, and Dustin, feel free to agree or you disagree. That anytime you're drinking, and if you yourself become a little argumentative or ornery or whatever, and you meet up with the wrong people that are drunk and angry, anything can happen, right? So maybe he was pursued outside after the party. Like if he walked away from the party, if he had an argument, who knows who was outside? You know what I mean? Like and then he gets a little mouthy, and that's what happens when you're drunk. I think that's like kind of common to a lot of people. You get mouthy, you're not yourself, you're uninhibited. So who knows? But I definitely, for some reason, it seems like his injuries, some of them were consistent with a beat down because his head was bashed in, right? I mean, he had blunt force trauma, but then as we spoke before, some of it can be like almost like you had said, Dustin, him being dragged. You want to get into that more, like because his fingers were shred and
Yeah.
the parts of his body. And I think even in the autopsy report, it talks about some kind of black substance, or am I correct?
Yep. Yeah, it's in there. Yeah.
The shoulder area. Okay,
Yep.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And as we were talking, to kind of give the audience a little bit of an overview, and when we were talking about this autopsy report, the thing that struck me, aside from the 2 pages of injuries that the coroners got listed there, was that would be, and of course I'm not a medical professional, but those are the types of injuries that you see in motorcycle accidents all the time. Now, we're not painting a picture that he was far too wasted to hop on a motorcycle, and if he had wrecked a bike on Highway 81, there would have been a yard sale of parts and you name it. But what I'm getting at, and as somebody who raced motorcycles for a lot of years and taught motorcycle racing, those types of cranial and internal injuries, again, I'm not saying that's what it's from, but since he wasn't on a motorcycle, the only other way you might have this interesting combination of these really serious head injuries, not to mention the serious internal injuries. When it's important to understand, like when you come off a motorcycle at speed, it doesn't even have to be that fast. One of the worst wrecks I ever had was, maybe 40 miles an hour, and it beat the daylights out of me. I mean, it was really harsh. But not only are you impacting the ground from whatever distance you're coming off the bike, but you've got this kinetic energy that's pushing you in a linear motion forward. So when you hit the ground, you may not be hitting it just once. You turn it, you literally are going to start ragdolling. You're going to start sustaining serious cranial and internal injuries, but you're also going to start accumulating abrasions because you are not between. What happens is you'll start to slide and clothing or a body part or something will catch and you get flipped again, and you keep impacting and impacting the ground, especially your head or your limbs, because they're just kind of flopping around out there, and with all this kinetic energy, it has nowhere else to go except running into the ground, and it's just constantly taking a beating. And the thing that I also thought was interesting about that autopsy report, which kind of led me to this theory, right, was his legs weren't that beat up, his lower body wasn't that beat up. And that is extremely consistent, again, with something you'd see somebody coming off of a vehicle and impacting the ground and continuing their forward trajectory by hitting the ground repeatedly and again accumulating abrasions. It's just such a brutal. It's so well known within the motorcycle community, especially the race community. And as we had talked, when you have somebody at a track that comes off a bike in a pretty serious manner, the first thing that the EMTs are taught to never do is to cut that race suit, because that race suit is what's containing your organs. When you start splintering stuff up inside and you take that suit off, or if you cut it off, it starts to shift around in there. Now you've got all this broken shards of pieces of stuff that are shifting within your body. And we know Noah he had hemorrhaging, he had broken pieces inside of him. I mean, I just, if this guy had been hit by a car on Highway 81 where people are routinely driving 70 plus miles an hour, first of all, if he'd have been laying on the ground, there would have been obvious, marks from a vehicle. If he'd been standing, you would have still had obvious marks from a vehicle because it would have impacted him from his legs up, usually from the knees up. Now, a smaller sedan, that's another thing, throw you over the top, but a big old truck, which is not uncommon, might just bulldoze somebody. But that's a completely different type of impact than what this kid looks like he endured. Not to mention an impact with a truck, let's say a Ford F-350 at 70, 80 miles an hour. There would have been parts all over. It would have been super bad, really ugly. So when I see these types of injuries and I see, like Pam had brought out, that he's got these black marks, and now I don't know what those are from, but on pavement, if you don't have safety gear on a motorcycle and you hit the ground, you're going to get these blunt force injuries, but you're going to accumulate aggregate from the road, and it's going to mesh. Getting that stuff out, I can tell you from personal experience, when the nurse comes to get that out of your skin, it's embedded in there so deep, and they'll oftentimes have to give you morphine just to get through it, because you're going to pass out. It is brutal and is horrible. And I've seen so many bike wrecks where the asphalt gets embedded into people's skin, and it doesn't have a particular, well, it has a particular look, but it can get so far down in the skin, it may be hard to determine what it is. It's just black, it's dark, and you could easily see that, man, if he's got something like that going on, then being removed from a vehicle at speed and hitting the ground wouldn't be an outside stretch to imagine, if that makes sense. So, but we also have the thing here too, we've got this sleepy little county, like kind of how we started out the show. Yeah, it's rural. Typically people are super neighborly. Typically people are super friendly in these small communities. I live in a small community, and you know your neighbors, you know your people. But Jefferson County, Oklahoma's got a pretty high violent crime rate. So that tells me quite a bit too. Now that might mean that, and I know for sure in Oklahoma and like a lot of other states, all not just in the United States, but John, you mentioned this as we were talking, that alcoholism and alcohol abuse is massively prevalent. And if you've got that, and of course, with the advent of drugs and the fentanyl trade and everything else, it's pretty shocking when you've got an entire county of was like 7,000 people that is getting rated by the FBI as like a F for violent crime. Wow, that's a pretty shocking statistic. It tells me that there's, and this is not a judgment call on anybody that's there at all. It just means that there's an undercurrent of some pretty intense stuff happening. It could also mean that there's a pretty intense undercurrent of outlaw culture going on. And I know for a fact, not necessarily in Jefferson County, but when I was a young guy coming up, that those small communities were definitely impacted by smaller groups of people that had a lot of influence about what was done or wasn't done. So could Noah have just simply been drunk and ran across somebody like Pam said? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially in a town like Terrell, I mean, hell, there's what, 300 people there? I mean, you're not going to disappear into a crowd in a town like that. You know what I mean? And we all know, all of us have seen, especially when you're talking about vulnerable people, whether, it's addicts or sex workers or people that are just intoxicated, you become vulnerable. And the reality is that there's predators out there and they're going to take advantage of it.
When you talk, when you're talking and we talk about how violent that particular area can be, what I'm looking at here is the picture I have in my mind, my mind's eye, is we're seeing this young man and he's defenseless. Okay.
Completely.
At 0.14 blood alcohol level, I mean, he's defenseless. Okay. I mean, I don't think there's pretty much anybody that he could possibly beat up, being that intoxicated. Okay. I mean, I really don't. I mean, I think he's really, really, really out of it. So that tells me that if somebody did give him a beating and did give him a beating, or a couple people gave him a beating with blunt force objects, okay, to cause the trauma, the blunt force trauma. I mean, we have to be looking at a couple of people or one person that's extremely enraged, right? Really carrying a lot of anger towards him, a lot of rage towards him, but also to somebody with a very, very low or none at all empathy level. I mean, they could have very, very low empathy or have no empathy. And, they could be like psychopathic and feel no remorse. All right. Because this is not just two guys in a fight and one guy pulls out a bat or a tire iron or some other blunt force object and gives the guy a beating. Okay. This is somebody who unmercifully gives a beating to a young man who cannot defend himself. Okay. He cannot defend himself. Okay. Because he is so inebriated based on this alcohol level, and based on his actions, based on leaving the house with a couple of different shoes on, not knowing where his other shoe was at, and some of the other antics we've witnessed. And it all ties into this blood alcohol level. And he was drinking pretty good, but that does not give anybody the excuse to beat this guy completely to death and not have feelings, number one. I mean, you might as well be, at some point here with these injuries, you might as well just be hitting or kicking a tree or something, because there's nothing left. There's nothing going on. Like Dustin said early on about it being in an accident, when you have this much physical damage, you just pass out. You just go out. I mean, you can't go on. And again, the fact that there's such a high blood alcohol level, pretty sad stuff. But I think we're going to get some answers here. I think the area out there knows, the street knows out there. We're going to be hearing something. Remember this unmerciful beating by somebody with not a whole lot of empathy or no empathy at all, or, if it was a beating, somebody that, was just extremely enraged for whatever reason. And maybe a couple of guys that just wanted to give a guy a beating. I don't know. We're up in the air with this, but when we find out, the why here, why he got that beating, what did he do to make them so angry? I mean, then we're going to have a good idea on who it is. To me, in a way, it looks like it could even be strangers, because how could people that knew him have this, this level of hatred and disdain for him that would call for an unmerciful beating of this type to end his life? I mean, I don't know. So I'm caught between whether this is somebody that knows him or somebody that doesn't know him. I want you to know I'm in between there, because I don't know what happened to him when he left the house. And he was alone and he was walking, was going for a walk. That's what we hear. That's what we understand. I'm sure more will be revealed. The good news is that this is finally out. Pam, as you brought up, this goes back a lot of months, was never brought up, was never made news. Now it's out there, and we'll see where it's going to go. Is there anything else that you guys see here?
Yeah, if I could, John, just bring
Sure,
up,
you could anytime you want.
the fact of him not having his shorts on and them being on the road somewhere, and also the fact that he was supposedly, I read somewhere that he was in a fetal position when they found him, which is but the fact that he didn't have his clothes on, like, I don't know. I mean, that to me, that just rings of humiliation to me. You know what I mean? I mean, like I mentioned before, if these were people that were not invited to the party, but they knew these people, like say they were on the fringes, they knew these people, but they just crashed anyway, and they came, and something happens and they pursue him. I mean, I'm making all this up. This is just speculation. And somebody who's gonna, get angry with him and maybe hurt him in that way might also want to humiliate him. So,
Well, see, this is what I mean about, somebody with extremely low empathy to the point of maybe being psychopathic,
right.
I mean, they wanted to leave him out there all beat and broken, to the point of death. And that's not enough. I mean, they want to just put him out there and, have him humiliated, shame him. Like it wasn't enough to just beat him to death, Now, the other part of it too, and it goes back to what Dustin talked about, was jumping or getting thrown out of a car. If you're thrown out of a car instinctively, like Dustin mentioned,
Mhm.
you put your hands out, you try and, stop yourself. And that's usually instinct, right? But where the fetal position could come in, after listening to Dustin, I believe, if you're so beat up inside, like Dustin was talking about, right? Whether it's from a beating or, it is, being thrown out of the car at, 50, 60 miles an hour or something like that. I mean, at some point you would probably through pain, agony, for whatever reason, instinctively go into a fetal kind of position,
Protective.
because that would also be like protection too, right, Dustin?
100%. And
Yeah.
as 100%. And as we were talking, this kid wasn't found in town. He was found outside of town. And if he sustained all the injuries, now my opinion is that he probably had injuries prior to how they found him, but there, yeah, anything's possible. But with those types of injuries, I can't see this poor kid walking a mile down the road and just collapsing. I don't think he
Mhm.
could have come close to doing that. When you start breaking ribs and you start fracturing vertebrae, even when you're drunk, it hurts. And it's when you have internal bleeding, you don't feel right inside. If instinctively the place you're going to go is to town, not out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, there's nothing out there, and you're not going to just start walking some country road. You're going to try to find help if you even have the ability to have that kind of cognition. After if you've taken a brutal assault like that and you're super intoxicated. I mean, I get it. You could be completely turned around. You might not even know which way is up, especially with head injuries. That can really disorient a person severely. So, but I don't believe for a second he walked himself out there. And John, you gotta made a really good point about somebody or a group of people or the someone's with the lack of empathy, because whether they beat this kid and dumped him on the side of the road, or they threw him out of the car or whatever, I mean, that is just so severe. It's so severe, and it takes us, and especially if they threw him out of a car, that takes a special kind of that takes a special someone. And what I didn't see in the autopsy that I thought was interesting, again, I'm not, I'm not a medical examiner, but there was no mention, there was, very detailed, which was super interesting, but there wasn't any specific mention of, like any kind of tool marks or anything that I saw. So it made me wonder that, man, that's why, with the extent of his injuries, man, I just got to believe that there's something else going on there. Maybe in
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, just that I think that there's probably two separate events.
Yes, yes.
That's what I'm looking at. I mean, was he
Yeah.
beat the hell somewhere else and then thrown out there?
Yep.
Because I don't see any blood here or anything. Okay. We
Right.
did, but supposedly some of his teeth were found not
That's
too
right.
far from the body. That could come from a beating, but that means somebody has to be out there in the middle of nowhere with just beating on him, not worrying about any cars coming by and killing him. And, I mean, pretty vulnerable in a way, I guess, with traffic, if there's any traffic or cars coming by. But the other part of it is the teeth. I mean, they could be knocked out if somebody's beating, but if he gets thrown out of a car, that could cause his teeth to come out too.
Oh, absolutely.
So, but I'm not hearing blood, not seeing blood. Um, so did the deed take place elsewhere? And this was just the dump,
Mhm.
that we've seen so many times before, you know.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, yeah, I mean, not necessarily he was put on display, but in a way put on display and shamed and embarrassed by being naked. But, you know, pretty much just let's get rid of them and let them, they'll think he got hit by a car maybe or something, or, there's much more to this. And we really got to nail down the how.
John, what
before
about,
we can get to the why.
I was just gonna say, what about the two different shoes? I mean, who owns the other shoe, you know?
Yeah, they're perfect question. Perfect question. That's why you're
Mhm.
such a good investigator. Okay. You're a great researcher, great investigator. Who owned the other shoe? Who owned the other shoe?
Because
Okay. I'm sure the
that
police
person's
know.
missing a shoe too, right?
Yeah, right. Law enforcement knows, I'm sure.
Mhm.
So I guess we'll wait and see what happens there, More to be revealed, definitely here. The most important thing, this is top of mind in a lot of people's heads now. It's gaining legs, as we say, gaining traction in the news. All right. And that's exactly where he should be, because no young man deserves to die like this. And whether he's drinking or he's not drinking, he doesn't deserve to die like this. He deserves a shot at a life,
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Anything else before we break?
No, I mean, right now we're working on such limited information. There's just it. There's kind of simultaneously a lot there while also not being a lot there. I mean, I think it is horrible as it sounds. I think at least right now, the best information we have is just from Noah himself, and his condition, which is just is just heartbreaking. That I mean, it's a 19-year-old kid. Like, nobody deserves that kind of beating. But I mean, even if you're drunk, like, come on, that's so far. I mean, getting smashed in the at a house party and mixing it up with some dudes is, let's face it, that's not that uncommon. But this is so far beyond that it does. We have to ask those questions, because whether somebody's covering it up because they it was accidental or it was on purpose, either way, like, that's a bad deal, and people like that should not be interacting with other people in the community, because those communities get really impacted by this type of violence. I mean, any community does, but in larger cities, it becomes kind of a way of life. Out there, it's a different thing. It's when you've got a community, an entire county with only, again, 7,000 people or whatever it is, you take a loss like that, it's a real deal, man. And my heart really goes out to not only Noah's family, but everybody down there. It's terrible.
It boils down to who's either that psycho that went psycho on him, okay, or along with that, who was really angry at him, who was enraged at him. And we don't have the answer for that, but those kids may have a clue who had that kind of animosity towards him, that kind of rage, that kind of anger. Again, if it was somebody, in their atmosphere that they knew and understood, or are these just a couple of guys or strangers that were just out there and ran into him and decided to, just kill him and give him the beating of his life. I mean, it's just, there are people like that too, as we know.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Anything else before we break, Pam?
Well, I just want to offer my condolences to the
Yeah,
and
we
and everybody else who loved him, because he seemed to be a really good kid,
yeah,
Definitely.
really fun-loving, had his whole life ahead of him.
yeah,
He deserves justice.
yeah. It's very tragic, very, very tragic. Well, our audience as well, I'm sure they offer their condolences. And to our audience, I want to say thank you so much for putting up with us today and listening to us. We were really getting into it here a little bit, and we really appreciate you. We can't thank you enough for allowing us into your homes. And all I can say is please send us any comments you like. We're always interested in your comments, what you think. That's important to us. Most importantly, you heard us talking about the violence. You watch television, I'm sure. You watch different things online, and are privy to the kind of violent world we live in. There's a lot of violence out there. So most importantly, stay on your toes, take care of yourself, have a great day. And, until next time, God bless and thank you so much from all of us. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, John and Pam. Thanks to your audience as
Yeah.
well. Always great.